Hey everyone, it's Joe. If you like what we do here on the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. Just $5 a month gets you access to our entire bonus episode catalog, as well as every regular episode 1 full week early. Access to all of our side series that are currently ongoing and our back catalog of those as well. Gets you ebooks, audiobooks, first dibs on live show tickets and merchandise when they're available, and also gets you access to our Discord, which has turned into a lovely little community. So go to patreon.com/lions led by donkeys and join the Legion of the Old Crow today. Lions led by donkeys. Hello and welcome to the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. I'm Joe. My country, the People's Democratic Republic of Donkia, has issues. Thanks to our colonial history with world superpower Soudcloudnium, our newly independent nation has little in the way of resources, infrastructure, or professional development. Things are not made better by the fact that the few of us that rose to the surface to take control have begun to steal funds from the few experts we still have, namely disposable vapes and White Monster. When the people begin to protest against us, saying we're causing all of these issues, I see the refusal to acknowledge that I have set boundaries quite triggering. After being gaslit by these serial narcissists, I asked my fellow commanders, Nate and Tom, if they have the mental bandwidth to hold space for me so I could trauma dump a bit. They agree that these protests are being incredibly toxic. We decide, as a form of self-care, we could not allow this to continue. It's very hard for us to watch the secret police disappear dissidents. I don't think people realize this. It has only reinforced our leadership through trauma bonding. Fellas, how are you doing?
I hate it when my subjects love bomb me, but then they decide to ghost me when I start killing them with the secret police.
This is based on a very stupid idea that I came up with during our bonus episode last month on the Battle of Checkpoint Pasta of the tender dictator.
Woke Idi Amin.
I mean, if it couldn't be any dumber than me and Tom have been going back and forth making Neutral Milk Hotel lyrics about Lord Byron. So, like, this show contains multitudes. No, I'm not going to sing any on here. They're for us only. But the concept is funny.
Donate $100 a month to the Patreon. You get access to our group chat.
Donate $100 a month to the Patreon, and I don't have an acoustic guitar, but I have an electric guitar that I can just strum without amplification. And I will play Jeff Mangum's A plus B equals C fucking simple ass compositions and sing in that I cannot hit those notes. My lyrics about Lord Byron. I'll do it. But it has to be a monthly subscription. It can't be a one-off, all right? My dignity is worth more than that.
He's going to sing the whole thing in Mickey Mouse voice.
When you were young, you were the king of carrot flowers. Could work.
You know, we just had Nate Timber. Now we're getting January. Because we're doing a 4-part series on the Kagera War. That's right. I took time off to write a month-long series. Are you guys familiar at all with the Kagera War?
No. Much more kind of familiar with like all the stuff that precipitates it between like Milton Obote and Idi Amin having the most petty falling out ever over lots of gold. But
oh yeah, we'll get there. That's for sure. This whole thing is a war based on petty grievances, and not entirely just petty grievances, but people involved, I think, personally hate one another more than a lot of the wars that we talked about before. But I'm hitting the big old African military history button because I love talking about it so much. Because if there's one thing we love more on the show than an absolute psychopath getting control of an ox cord of a nation then running it into the ground, is that same psychopath pissing off someone more powerful than they are and having everything taken away from them by force.
Yeah, I know. To the context of, like, I suppose as much as I know about this war, it involves 2 of my favorite groups of people that I won't name because it will spoil what's eventually coming.
Yes. So, a small note here on the name that I chose for the series, the Kagera War. That's the generally accepted name for the most part. I know some countries have different names for the war than the one that I've chosen. I'm going with this one. My bad. Another small note, though. This is not an exhaustive history of Idi Amin or his 8 years in power. We're going to be covering a lot of that history because it's kind of impossible to understand the context of the war and the state of the Ugandan military and as a state without understanding him. But we cannot hope to cover Amin, Ugandan colonial and then independent politics, nearly 10 years of crimes against humanity, and then a war in a concise series that won't last the better part of several months. So if there's some particularly horrible thing that Idi Amin did that we do not go over, we did not miss it or ignore it, but it doesn't fit in the context of this series that is about the Kagera War, not Idi Amin.
Or anything that comes immediately afterwards.
Yeah, we have to talk a little bit about that anyway, and Yehudit Museveni and things like that, but like context is important. I cannot cover everything in regards to the nation state of Uganda as it's ever existed if this is going to be a consumable podcast series. But before we get into how an alliance of Muammar Gaddafi, Idi Amin, and the PLO of all people all got their teeth kicked in for a very, very stupid reason, we first have to go over my personal favorite invasion, the invasion of context. So Idi Amin Dada, he has several names. This is the one he's most commonly known as, was born on May 30th, 1928 in Kampala, we think. Off to a good start.
Also, I should say the context war is just another name for trying to have a conversation with myself or Nate.
Paperwork for Ugandans, especially that of a small Kakwa tribe member like Idi Amin was virtually non-existent at the time. Records of births were generally passed down through oral tradition. This is made all more complicated by the fact that Idi Amin lied about pretty much every facet of his life. And, once he becomes head of state, he begins to change the official personal record of himself multiple times. For example, despite saying for years, I am, this many years old, he says in another interview that he wasn't entirely sure how old he was. The man cannot be trusted.
Altering the official records to say that I'm 6'3" and have a massive hog.
That's one thing he didn't have to lie about. The dude was huge.
Yeah.
I don't know about the size of his hog. That cannot be confirmed nor denied, but he was a large lad to the point it caused medical conditions.
I'm not going to do the most risky on-air Google search.
Turn safe search off. He was the third child in his family to a father who had been conscripted as a child soldier for the British during World War I, during the Tanganyika campaign, which we have talked about. There's some reports putting him as young as 6 years old at the time when he was conscripted. I mean, knowing how big Idi Amin is, I have a feeling this is a rather large 6-year-old, but I don't think he's that big.
Yeah, he's solidly in the large nephew contingent.
Yeah, it's a very special contingent of the British conscription force. After this, his father joined the Protectorate Police Force, which was the colonial cops of British Uganda. And young Idi was born on the floor of his police barracks building, which might be the most way that anybody can tell you're going to be evil is that you're born on the floor of a police building by a cop.
I feel like sort of like being born under a bad sign. I feel like you're going to have cop in your blood, even if you're not related to a cop. If you're born on the floor of a police station, that's going to follow you forever. The die's been cast. You have cop brain.
Exactly. There's no turning back. It's the only way to make cop your actual sign.
Exactly. Actually, we don't realize is you can't convert to being a cop. It's an inherited trait, like a kind of like religious community. So you have to be born in a police station. Everyone else, they're faking, but the true orthodoxy knows that cops are born, not made.
That's right.
Being an ethnic cop is a matrilineal trait.
Yeah, it's called being a Irish person from Massachusetts.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's a Irish American. If they take DNA tests on fucking 23andMe before it went bankrupt, the cop would just show up instead of anything else.
Others have argued that Amin was actually born in what today would be Sudan, due to the fact that his tribe, the Kakwa people, generally lived in the northwest of Uganda on the border, and the border back then was so blurry at the time, people often just moved back and forth freely. But I should point out that other historians argue that this is a form of revisionism on the behalf of modern-day Ugandan politicians attempting to find a way to say that their nation's greatest criminal was actually a foreigner. Either way, we actually have no idea. Amin's mother, Aisha Ate, was from the Lugbara tribe, and a member, some put her as a priestess, of what was called the Allah Water movement. The Allah Water movement was a cult-like movement of the Lugbara people that rejected modern medicine and instead thought the cure for virtually everything lay in drinking tea made up of a local flower that made you trip absolute balls.
Hell yeah.
I mean, I respect it.
Yeah, there's worse things you could be doing in the world. I mean, if you're tripping a ton of balls, you're not having a lot of worries in your life, other than maybe the ants under your skin or whatever.
Smoking on that Edie pack.
Through tripping said balls, drinkers were believed to gain supernatural powers and, of course, be able to fuck for hours. Modern historians show that not only was this a kind of faith-healing, melt your brain with tea group, but they also were kind of a politically anti-colonial movement, wanting Ugandans and its people, as they understood them, to be free of British rule. It's also one of the main reasons why the British ended up outlawing their practices. Owing to a local rumor, Amin's father believed that he was not the true father of his son. He thought he could have been the result of one of these drinking teas and fucking for hours type situations. And his father demanded a paternity test, which you're probably wondering, what did a paternity test look like back then? Well, something kind of sort of a horror film. It meant leaving the newborn in the forest for 4 days. And if the baby survived, well, then you are the father.
Oh my God. I mean, I guess this is sort of like, there's plenty of antecedents to this in many cultures around the world, but still it's just horrifying.
Yeah, it's what if, the Maury Povich show was hosted by the Kakwa tribe of Uganda. After this, the family moved together into the police barracks, separating when Amin was 4 years old. At which point, Amin went to live with his mother. Amin soon became a student of his kind of sort of priestess mother, drinking the drug tea, but also learning how to mix it and prepare it for others. So, yeah, he becomes a philosophical street pharmacist.
At this time, towards, I suppose, the end of the colonial age, especially for the British Empire, a lot of these kind of shamanic practices came back into vogue in a lot of indigenous cultures in the country. So this is not surprising at all.
No, not at all. And it's not the only one going on. It's just the only one that Idi Amin happens to be born into as a kind of acid nobility.
Idi Amin's mixing up that walkie slush.
He's going to do a forward exchange program, go to the South, learn how to mix the perfect cup of lean.
That's where Gucci Mane learned off Idi Amin, how to mix that perfect cup.
I'm sorry. There's a part of me that's just laughing because it's like, all right, look, Idi Amin, obviously we don't want to downplay any of the dumb shit that he did.
No, that just hasn't happened yet, so it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just one of those things where at the same time, the idea that like there is to some extent a cultural lineage of gripping and sipping that extends all the way over to, sub-Saharan Africa. It's like, well, you know what? I'm learning something new.
Eventually, Young Thug would say, 500 horses inside my machine. Idi Amin.
I think Idi Amin would have been a lot happier if instead of, learning how to mix hallucinogenic tea and then becoming a military strongman through a process we will talk about, he just discovered real big fish. I mean, literally anything,
If he was the last king of Scotland, you didn't have to be the last king of Scotland. You could be one of the underground kings. All right. I think it would have been better for all of us.
Here's where we get to pause and talk about some good old-fashioned British racism. Because Amin's people, the Kakwa, as well as other northern tribes of Uganda, were considered by the British as brutish, violent, and backward, owing mostly to how the British found their traditional religious practices, which sometimes included animal sacrifice and blood rituals, some going as so far as, if you follow those long enough back, they did those same rituals with humans. The British found those strange and disgusting. Some of this is heavily disputed. For example, what these blood rituals looked like, if they engaged in cannibalism, like the British claimed they did, though they never witnessed it, things like that. The Kakwa tribe also did not create a society as far as one that the British could recognize as one, unlike their southern Ugandan neighbors. So they looked at them and were like, these people are cave people. They don't make things that we recognize as society or religion. So they fell into the martial class system, the martial races system. So the British filled their colonial military ranks with recruits from the north, from tribes like the Kakwa, in order to repress their more quote-unquote enlightened and civilized southerners. The Brits saw the northerners as one of their martial people. We've talked about this on the show before, like how they saw Sikhs and Gurkhas and things like that. This is the idea that some ethnicities in the British Empire were just inherently warlike and made better soldiers. The British saw martial people they desired as being more willing to follow orders and commit horrible violence at the drop of a hat. They saw these people as like more willing to follow orders, therefore less likely to be educated, to get ideas about like independence and sovereignty and shit like that. Of course, this was all reinforced with how the British treated these people. They thought a certain group of people were martial. So shit, I guess you don't need us to build schools and stuff because you're not so good at book learning. This means there's little in the way for people given this title to grow up and out of this situation at all. They're now desperately poor and they're very, very rural, away from any of the civilization in the form of schools, hospitals, anything like that that the British are building in their colonies. So this creates a captive population for young men, knowing enlisting was pretty much the only way to care for their families. So the British created a military caste system, reinforced it, and then called it race science, bringing things back to Little Amin, who is not so little anymore. Like I've joked about already, but wasn't much of a joke. Idi Amin has always been gigantic. It's often noted that he was the largest child in his village by far. There are conflicting accounts on whether he used his size to be a brutal and violent bully. This is a story that's often told, but he probably wasn't. This is owing to the fact that, yeah, his mom was considered a quote-unquote priestess of this religion, and that kind of makes it sound like they were better off than other people, but they absolutely were not. The family was desperately poor, and he dropped out of school pretty much immediately. He had very little schooling at all at this point. He was illiterate, and he spent all of his time doing odd jobs like tending to animals, doing manual labor, fixing things around the village to earn any bit of money he could to help out his mom.
As is the birthright of the largest son of the community. You are the oxen.
Yeah, that was me. So like it bears to think about, if he was such a brutal, violent asshole of a kid, why would people keep hiring him and keep him around? You know, if you're the dickhead of the village, people probably aren't giving you jobs all the time. I think it's easy to see him and what he becomes and assume he's always been a brutal tyrant using violence to get his way, when that just does not seem like that was the case.
It's kind of like, I find a lot of the time with like, you know, truly evil people like, you know, Idi Amin or Hitler, for example, there's this really big attempt to try and pathologize their evil and like the bad things they've done. Like that documentary about like, oh, Hitler had a micro penis. I'm like, yeah, he also like slaughtered millions of people. It's like, does it really matter?
There's a lot of other things that these people go through that is much easier to explain, how they become dull to violence and figure it out as a problem-solving tool. Obviously, Hitler is a veteran of World War I, and Idi Amin is about to join the military.
Also, I would just throw this in there too, is that I think that people like to pathologize stuff and kind of create this semantic link, kind of an unconscious idea that it's because of some sort of failing or insecurity about a thing. But in my experience, people who are true sociopaths, like they tend to be pretty good at knowing what they can and can't get away with within the context of where they are. And then as soon as they can get in a position where they know they can get away with stuff, they just do whatever they want to do. And it's like, that doesn't mean that, you know, this person was a sociopath and just like a violent, you know, aggressor and bully and generally hostile person from earliest age. But like, it's probably likely that something that he is about to experience and what Joe's about to talk about gave him the understanding that like you can in fact use violence to get what you want, and in certain contexts you are granted free reign to do that, and that will change people.
That's exactly what happens. Yeah, that's exactly what happens with Idi Amin, in my opinion, because Amin joins the King's African Rifles 4th Battalion, like many others from his region. The fourth was the main employer for men not only of the Kakwa tribe, but of the Nubi and Acholi tribes as well. When exactly he enlisted is unknown. Some people say he joined at some point around 1943, while others say he joined in 1945. The British Foreign Office says he joined in 1946. And again, this is not helped by the fact that Amin routinely changes his story regarding his military service under the British Crown. The interesting part is all of this could be true, kind of. While he almost certainly officially enlisted in 1946, there's a good chance that he had been informally inducted into the Rifles when he was 12 as a kitchen helper aboard a Royal Navy ship, the Yoma. This is a very common practice at the time, and it tracks with the original story of Amin himself, who said he was originally a cook in the military. Though Amin's stories from here are entirely untrustworthy, he said he was aboard the Yoma when it was sunk by a U-boat, but his telling of the story differs from not only the official one, but from literally any other survivor, and no other survivor puts Amin on that ship. He also said he fought as a soldier during the Burma campaign of World War II, which he absolutely did not. There's zero evidence he'd ever been to Burma as a whole in his entire life, and he didn't officially enlist in the Rifles until after World War II was over. By all accounts, the British officers wanted him to enlist owing to the fact that he was fucking huge. He was 6'4" and jacked. But most importantly to white officers of the colonial military, they thought Amin was dumb. Idi Amin was not a dumb man. He did not have the kind of intelligence they could recognize, mostly because he was giant and illiterate, but he was clever, as the British will eventually find out.
If I remember correctly, Idi Amin would do stuff to kind of play up this idea of like dumbass gentle giant, but like, you know, to impress his superiors, like jumping into a pool in his uniform and stuff like that, and like doing feats of strength. And it was always assumed like, oh, he's just like a big kid and he's dumb. And it's like, I think he was playing that up so that you guys would not scrutinize him in the same way. You know what I mean?
Somewhat, especially when he was a lower ranking soldier, because he takes the military life incredibly well. He shines his boots, he irons his uniform, and this is where he learns that violence is a decent problem-solving technique, mostly because the British colonial military is a rigid one, even compared to how any militaries of the same era were run. White superiors had normally local auxiliaries under their command that they used to dispense out horrible violence against their fellow soldiers to keep them in line. And Amin quickly becomes their favorite tool to keep soldiers in line. He is beating the ever unholy dog shit out of his fellow soldiers at the slightest violation of rules and regulations, to the point that his own officers complain about it. And then when they're like, why are you beating them so badly? He would just laugh.
I feel as though this is a thing that's interesting to point out, is that in some instances later on in British colonial things, you actually have situations where junior enlisted and non-commissioned officers are different races, to include some of the people in the country, like where the colonial enterprise is taking place. But in stuff at this era in Central Africa, it would absolutely be what Joe's just describing, where it's white officers and black NCOs and black soldiers. And thus, the white officers aren't, soiling their consciences by being the one doing this.
Yeah.
They wouldn't do it either. It would have been the white NCOs doing it to white soldiers in Britain. But in this case, like, it's like a magnification of the same system, and it's far more brutal, and they are far less bothered by it when they've got somebody like Idi Amin or other large NCOs to basically, like you just described, brutalize and torment and kind of like enforce an absurd level of military discipline, which is toxic to the human brain. You and I both know this, and we didn't experience... we did experience hazing, but not like this, and it wasn't as like openly systematized in the same way.
No, I didn't have the large boy in charge of beating me. At the time in the King's Rifles, white men were officers, black men could not be officers. The highest rank that they could achieve was warrant officer, which meant something different back then.
Yeah, in the British Army, warrant officers, either above sergeant major or below sergeant major, but like I've encountered enlisted warrant officers before because they're senior NCOs, basically.
Yeah, that was pretty much all it was. He was also really good at boxing. He became so good at boxing, he became the Ugandan national champion and went undefeated for 9 goddamn years.
So he also could have been a green to gold NCO officer in the American Army, which was the thing they were obsessed with back then, too. It's like, hey, this cool-ass sport, it proves our NCOs are tough, and every now and again it blinds one of our soldiers, but hey, who cares?
Yep. He was also one of the best black rugby players in Uganda, though he dropped that sport because as a black man, he can only play at such a high level, and anything else was shut off to him due to his race.
It's really shocking to me that they segregated rugby, but it doesn't surprise me. I'm just like, man, you guys are such... We have a lot of American listeners, but I'm sufficiently lived in Britain to be like, you guys are such cunts. Like, just in the British sense. In the British sense, understand that it's not a gendered slur in the British sense. Well, it is. It's gendered towards men. Man, you guys are such cunts. I can't believe it. That's just weirdly... That detail being shocking is weird, but like, it is. They segregated rugby.
He could be good at boxing, but he could only be so good at rugby. He was promoted into the NCO ranks, where he again impressed his white superiors for vicious brutality against the soldiers under him. Like I said, that he would joke about beating the shit out of his soldiers, and his white superiors, despite having complaints, never stopped him. And he only got promoted from it. So again, he's learning that viciousness is the key to success. And it's only reinforced. He and his unit were eventually deployed to Kenya to support British forces in putting down the Mau Mau rebellion.
Ooh.
Yeah. And without going into the entire history here, because that is a different series in the future, the British methods were, in short, horrific. And Amin's personal conduct during the rebellion was called, quote, manifest sadism by his own officers. Now, I need to point out here, that does not mean he was punished nor stopped from doing these things. They were only supported. And Amin, unsurprisingly, excelled at committing terrible violence and was recognized for this by his promotion to sergeant, a rank he was only able to obtain due to cheating, not only from him, but also his commanding officer, because Amin had a horrible knowledge of the English language at the time. And in order to go from corporal to sergeant, he had to speak English. So his commanding officer just helped him cheat on the exam because they liked him so much because of the manifest sadism.
That's really telling, because it's like, if you thought this guy was going to be a liability, then you absolutely had an out in the sense of limiting his advancement. And instead they're like, no, we like him being our kind of pet torturer so much that we're going to find a way to bend the rules and get him further and further along.
Yep.
That's telling.
That's right. Idi Amin would spend the rest of his life being kind of self-conscious about his level of English, despite the fact he spoke it mostly fluently by the end of his life.
Look, John Wayne Gacy is really good at putting on makeup. The other stuff doesn't matter. I think he can advance in clown school. You know, like we need to kind of make an exception here.
That's unfair. I think Idi Amin killed significantly more people with his own bare hands than John Wayne Gacy ever did.
I'm sure he did, yeah.
Unfortunately, Seth Putnam died before he could write a song called Idi Amin Was a Sensitive Man.
We said the word cunt once, so now we can start talking about anal cunt. We've broken the ice.
Yeah.
We can talk about Hitler was a sensitive man. We can talk about the Picnic of Love. We can talk about if Hitler was alive, he would listen to The Cure, The Smiths, and Depeche Mode. God, what a freak, man. I'm sorry. Like, this guy wasn't actually funny, but there is something. If you were a teenager in the 90s.
Like, sometimes it's like the Marilyn Manson Onion articles, like Marilyn Manson's just going door to door trying to shock people. Like, just fucking give it up.
Well, the Picnic of Love was actually funny because Seth Putnam ran out of things that he could be offensive about, so he flipped it on people and did an album with songs called, like, I Respect You Both as a Woman and a Person and stuff like that. It's just like, it was like, what's going to be the most shocking thing to my fans? Like, me being nice. That is actually funny.
Just about the only thing that slowed down Idi Amin's military career temporarily was when he got syphilis. This maybe would not have ended his career, but it would have ended his climb up the promotion ladder at the time. But not for Idi Amin, because his superiors liked him so much. He was eventually promoted to warrant officer in 1959, which at the time was the highest rank a black soldier could get within his unit. But by 1960, it was becoming clear that the British were going to leave many parts of their overseas empire. You know, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's famous Winds of Change speech and all of that. But little had been done to prepare a lot of these places for independence, but specifically for our series, Uganda. Uganda as it existed and would exist had never existed as a historical entity, not as a state. This led to a lot of tension between the Northerners and the Southerners, anti-colonial bodies, and the British, all just kind of shrugging and saying, well, you'll figure it out. And as for the King's African Rifles, things get even weirder. Because as a body, it was not an independent military whatsoever. They were entirely commanded by white men, And as the rifles were broken down into different units to be given over to the newly independent nations that these units would have been stationed in, they just get called, hey, you're the army now. But the British made no attempt to do what's called generally Africanization prior to this. And by that, I mean training, promoting, and empowering African military officers to take command of the military when all the white people left. You know, be able to do logistics, fly planes, be general officers, be staff officers, do all of the things you expect the military to do. Because this takes years and generations of professional education and experience to be able to do. The British simply did not do this. Instead, they began that process in 1961 in what could be considered a crash course. That included promoting the first 2 Ugandans to be commissioned officers in the new Ugandan military. Those 2 men would be Shaban Apollot and Idi Amin. Yeah.
I'm really taken aback by this because obviously it repeats itself, and in some cases it was even more extreme in terms of cutting out the entirety of the local population, even the sympathetic and like elite local population, from any actual echelons of development. And I guess with the Brits, it's just like, I don't know, Tom knows a lot more about this than I do from personal experience, but they love to wax so nostalgic about how like generous and munificent they were towards their colonial possessions. And it's like, man, shut the fuck up.
Of course they were very nice to Uganda. They promoted Idi Amin.
Exactly. No one can argue that the British suffered from the same issue as Americans. There was no institutional bigotry. They were willing to approach it from a meritocratic angle, and when they saw excellence, even amongst native populations, they promoted it. For example, big guy who hits people a lot, they're like, make this man the fucking chief of staff of the army immediately. There is no army. There is no chief of staff. There is no military academy. Make one for him. I'm sure it'll work out great.
They didn't even make a military academy. They had no additional training. During Amin's first assignment as a lieutenant, one of 2, while still being a member of the British-led, newly renamed Ugandan Rifles, he helped commit a mass slaughter of civilians in what was known as the Turkana incident. 7 months after this, Uganda's independent, and Milton Obote becomes prime minister. Now, Amin and Apollot's promotions were considered something of a stopgap, while a group of Ugandans attended Sandhurst Military Academy for a more traditional military education. This is a process that takes a very long time. Though, in the meantime, the Ugandan military was largely still commanded by white British dudes who just stayed on during the transition. This caused a lot of problems with the newly independent country, as black soldiers were still criminally underpaid and treated, well, like they always had been. This led Obote and others to think of a very fast but short-term solution, an even harder crash course in Africanization. And I should be clear here, I'm not saying that leaving a bunch of white dudes in place is the right choice either. Uganda didn't have any good choices available to them at the time. It was a matter of picking what they saw as the least bad of a series of bad. So they expanded the military. But the British really didn't want to help them do this. So they reached out to who else but Israel.
Yep.
Who quickly began training the first pilots of the new Ugandan Air Force and an entire new battalion of soldiers for the army. This is seen more as an attempt of Obote trying to play the Israelis and British off one another to compete for influence in the newly independent country. Who could give me more stuff? And it's a good game to play if you're a newly independent, largely poor, weak nation.
I mean, the Israelis also kind of did this between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, quite frankly.
Yes, they did. Yeah. At the same time, Amin was promoted to major. In case you're wondering, did he go to Sandhurst or something? No, he did not. He still had not gone to any professional military education as an officer.
Yeah, it's interesting at this point, like post-independence, because you have essentially the 2 strains of a newly independent former colonial country having 2 of the most mental cunts at the helm in the form of Milton Obote and Idi Amin.
Yeah, Idi Amin's working his way up, but this is he's about to come to the part that really brings him into national power in a way, and that is the growing discontent within the Ugandan military. Obote attempted to calm soldiers with a promise of a pay raise, but he didn't have any money, so he could never really tell anybody when they were actually going to get this raise. And then this was followed by a mutiny of soldiers stationed at the Jinja barracks in 1964. This is not the first time that Ugandan soldiers had mutinied, but it was the most serious since independence. The mutinying soldiers demanded not only a pay raise, but better food and the dismissal of all British men from the army. A government minister, Felix Onama, traveled to the barracks to try to calm them all down, be like, boys, everything's going to be fine. You're going to get your pay raise, smooth things over. But instead, he's kidnapped by soldiers and force-fed the soldier's shitty diet of rotten cornmeal until he vomits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose the point I was going to make earlier is that, like, as in a lot of post-colonial countries, like early on, you will have the two wings. You will have like the military kind of functionaries who are a holdover of the colonial power, and then you will have people like Obote who are like much more kind of like politicians and maneuvers and kind of a little bit like hucksters who will be like, okay, they're just solving problems as they crop up rather than having an overarching plan. And like the mutiny at Jinja is a perfect example of Obote being one of those.
Yeah, Obote has no idea what he's supposed to do about this mutiny, but then Major Idi Amin reappears because his job in the Ugandan military was recruitment, and he was doing what he had always done and what the British had always done before him, and that was going to the north and recruiting his fellow tribesmen, because Amin also believes that they're the best soldiers in Uganda because, well, shit, that's where I'm from. And Amin has a deep, deep love affair with the British military. I mean, it's easy to think of him most accurately as a bit of a Tiabu.
This is what being a Tiabu gets you.
Yeah, he comes back down from the north during the mutiny. He goes to the prime minister as something of an advocate for the soldiers, but most importantly, not a guy that's actively taking part in the mutiny. He asks for their demands to be met because he points out like things are going to get a lot worse if we don't do that. And Obote agrees. And in turn, he sees Amin as a loyalist to him. He did not take part in the mutiny and said he came and talked to me as a boy. So he's rewarded. And he's also seen as a guy that obviously soldiers will respect because he became an advocate for them when they had nobody else. So Amin gets appointed the commander of the Jinja barracks. So as a result of this, neither Obote, Apolot, or Amin follow any recommendations given to them by a guy named Colonel John Tillett. He's the British guy that was technically second in command of the Ugandan armed forces. And Tillett is like, okay, well, you guys don't have a lot of money. You're not part of the crown anymore, so we're not giving you a ton of money. Obviously, expanding the military is kind of a bad idea because you can't pay everybody. So maybe you should downsize it. Then you don't have to worry about mutinies anymore, right? They ignore him, and Tillett resigns as second in command, and he leaves the country before a successor could even be chosen. However, this was paired with the head of the Commonwealth Office at the time, a guy named Duncan Sandys, going to... Duncan Sandys sounds like a kind of flavored coffee or a donut of some kind.
That's some shit they do in Boston. Fucking Duncan Sandys.
He goes to Kampala to warn the Ugandan army that they're not going to be playing this shit anymore, this two-timing us with Israel. He insisted that a British commander remain in place or all British assistance would be pulled. And you can't be going to the Israelis for anything anymore. Command passes to a man named Colonel Groom, and the Ugandan army was essentially to remain a proxy of the British forces a full 2 years after being independent from the crown. The British then turned on Minister Onama. This is because Onama favored Apolot over Amin for promotion, namely because Amin's reputation for brutality, mostly thanks to the Turkana incident, and because Amin was unfailingly pro-British. Amin was the opposite of a Ugandan nationalist. He did not want Uganda to be independent at this point. So obviously the British wanted him to be the guy that gets promoted over Apolot, who is as much of a nationalist as Obote is. He wants Uganda to be independent. He wants Uganda to do anything it needs to do to get on its feet. Meanwhile, Amin's like, I don't know why we would work against the Brits. Why would we do that? Now, this would change, of course, but for now. But Onama had already promoted Apolot to brigadier, meaning he outranked the Brits man, Groom, and Apolot fired him with the approval of Obote, which, look, everybody involved in this sucks, but there is a great chef's kiss moment when the former colonial guy gets to fire the British officer who's still kicking around. Perfect. Then Obote dismisses all British people from Ugandan service. Obote called this Ugandanization, which is slightly different than before because it's going to be even faster and harder now. On paper, this was a great idea, and it did lead to a mass uplifting of Ugandan men within the military service. Within a few short years, Uganda went from having 2 men who were commissioned officers to having 55, though individual British soldiers remained on their job to do things that the Ugandans just did not know how to do yet. You know, like operating radios, logistic systems, working on jets, things like that. It kind of goes without saying, though, that this mass, very rapid uplifting of newly promoted men means that they were wildly unqualified for the jobs that they had. This is, in my opinion, not their fault. They didn't have time or a chance to build a professional military or give them a professional military education yet. The Ugandan government simply did not have the means to do so, but Amin himself was promoted to colonel, and then in 1964, deputy commander of the army, specifically still in charge of recruitment and training.
This will not go badly at all.
For anybody. One of the first things he did was go back and rehire hundreds of soldiers that had been fired during previous mutinies. Amin publicly and privately within the government said that there was no mutiny. They were simply on strike. So you shouldn't be able to fire them. So this is, the classic moving men's loyalty away from the state to you personally situation. Mm-hmm. Amin, again, made sure to stick to the recruitment standards that the British had taught him, only recruiting men from the north like himself. So not only is he earning the personal loyalty of the military, they're all from his backyard. And they all see people from the south of Uganda called Bugandans as outsiders, enemies, whatever. Obote and Onama continued getting closer and closer with the Israelis, both in training and equipment, including pulling Ugandan officers out of training with the British and instead sending them to Israel instead, which not only pissed off the British, but it actually is a form of shooting themselves in the foot because they set them back years of professional development as the men were almost done at Sandhurst and now had to start over in Israel.
I heard they got this great ice cream flavor called WhatsApp. I need to try it.
The Brits said fine, but also pulled the rest of their soldiers out of Uganda, including the ones that the Ugandans were still relying on for technical expertise. Now, in neighboring Congo, there was a rebellion against the Western-backed anti-communist leader, Bozi Shambe, whose air force began bombing Ugandan villages on the border, accusing Uganda of harboring rebels, which is because they were. Obote supported the rebels, but not openly. Instead, he tasked Amin with handling that. And this drove a wedge between Amin and Appalat, as Appalat was technically Amin's superior, and Obote went around him to put Amin in charge of the effort. A good reason for this is Amin already had a pretty extensive track record for being willing to do horrendous shit if asked to. There's also the small fact that the Ugandan army was the most powerful part of Ugandan society, political, economic, or otherwise. And Amin had their loyalty. This was supported by Obote, who was quickly becoming one hell of an authoritarian and was a northerner himself from the Lengi tribe. So saddling in with Amin and effectively the entire military was a good way for Obote to remain in power. There's another interesting wrinkle here, though. Uganda and Tanzania were together in their support for the Congolese rebels. Obote and Tanzanian President Julius Nyerere were good friends, and they both saw Shambe as a little more than a Western puppet, which to be fair, he kind of was. So together with Amin, they began smuggling weapons to the Congolese rebels in exchange for resources like ivory and gold. Though since Uganda is pretty poor, they required resources up front, which they would then have to sell, get cash, and then trade them for with weapons, mostly with China. The weapons would then be brought into Uganda, stashed into the back of a truck, and transported overland through Kenya, who was not in on the plan at all, and then finally into Tanzania, and then finally over the Congolese border. Kenya stumbled upon this plan and got really fucking pissed off. But Obote and Amin's support for the rebels only got stronger. Rebels were training in Uganda, chilling at the Entebbe airport, and some of them were even crashing on Amin's couch. Quite literally, they were hot couching through Amin's personal palace.
The hot couch army. It's worth pointing out as well as like the situation in the Congo at this time is like Patrice Lumumba was assassinated 4 years earlier and like caused general kind of uproar in Congo. Yeah, it was essentially a Western puppet state after that, but watch a soundtrack to a coup d'etat You want to learn more about Patrice Lumumba?
Yeah, I'm planning on covering something to do with what's known as the Congo crisis at some point in the future, so look forward to that. They continued trading weapons for gold and ivory, which the rebels were then bringing over the border by the literal truckload. And remember, Amin is in charge of all this and has no idea how to run anything logistically. He just simply kept all that shit literally lying around his house in the open until he could load it onto a plane, give it to a British guy as a go-between, and then fly off and make deals. He had piles of Congolese gold and ivory just sitting in his backyard and shit.
Just a throne made out of gold and ivory.
This is all pretty much out in the open, and Ugandan opposition to Obote and Amin, mostly made up of Southerners and becoming more and more powerful within the government, attempted to use it as a way to get them out of power. A motion was entered into parliament demanding a suspension of Amin pending an investigation into, all of the illegal stuff. Obote and Onama were also both named in this parliamentary motion, meaning the opposition was really going for it. Parliament itself overwhelmingly voted in favor of the motion. So Obote set up a commission investigating Amin's suspiciously large personal bank account with the rebels just hanging out at his house playing Xbox and the trucks full of gold, and found all of these claims are without merit.
Amazing how that happens.
We investigated ourselves and found out we've done no wrongdoing.
Hey, they learned from the best, aka the Israelis.
Then, in February of 1966, Obote called a cabinet meeting and began arresting anyone he thought was disloyal to him. He arrested Apolot, he suspended the constitution, and began ruling through diktat. He ran into virtually no opposition to this, physically at least, thanks to Amin, who not only commanded the army, but the personal loyalty of the soldiers themselves, and any opposition to Obote would have to go through them first. And since doing all this torpedoed virtually any remaining civilian political support, Amin became the only thing keeping Obote in power. Obote and Amin then moved forward to crush their most hated opposition figure, the traditional Bugandan king of the south. There's a system of traditional kings and kingdoms in Uganda. His name was Edward Mutiza of Buganda. He commanded a lot of the personal loyalty of the Southerners. A lot of Southerners wanted some kind of constitutional monarchy with him in charge. And King Mutiza had a palace in Kampala. So Amin bombed the shit out of it and he was driven into exile. A year later, he took a third wife. This was from the Lengi tribe as like a political show of loyalty to Obote. Side note here, Amin would eventually go on to have 6 wives, but an unknowable amount of girlfriends that could be best understood as a Ugandan harem anime. I don't really want to go into Amin's love life here, but at a certain point, I kind of had to point it out because it's kind of ridiculous. And he loved his giant cousin. I just really want to tell the story of the gigantic cousin wife.
Idi Amin and Robert Crumb, the world's most cursed handshake.
Eventually, a new constitution is written by Obote, and lawmakers are forced to vote on it, while Amin's soldiers literally watched over them gun in hand, making sure it would pass. He also attempted to force all kinds of economic reforms through, but this is where Obote and other dictators like him tend to run into problems. I don't want to call them successful dictators necessarily, but let's say dictators that actually manage to move stuff along, get stuff done, build a state underneath them full of kinda, sorta, semi-competent yes men to put in place to do whatever the dickhead up top says, and then that actually gets done for the most part. Obote was not one of those men. He was so wildly unpopular, even amongst his own party, the Ugandan People's Congress, or UPC, that it hardly even functioned at this point, other than as a means for him to be in charge of something. State capacity, institutions, everything withered and died on the vine because he strangled the life out of the new country. Of course, Uganda was left as a mostly subsistence farming society by the British, with the professional class and administration of the country, when it was a colony, mostly made up of South Asian people that they brought in starting in the 1800s to act as what amounted to be middle management of the colony. They were a buffer between the Europeans and the African population. This created a massive wealth and economic disparity between South Asian and Black Ugandans. By the time independence rolled around, South Asian Ugandans, despite making up maybe 1% of the population fully controlled a quarter of all economic activity. For black Ugandans, there's pretty much nothing outside of subsistence farming. The British favored the South Asians for education and promotion, even within Uganda, and the British never really attempted to industrialize Uganda. So Obote attempted to, quote unquote, fix all of this with a state-controlled economy and controlled industrialization that can be best understood as confused dictator attempts to understand socialism, but only really skimmed something someone gave him once. He wrote a pamphlet underlying his ideology, what was called the Common Man's Charter, but it was really nothing, because Obote was never really a socialist. And at the time, there wasn't really an empowered socialist movement within the country at all. And the few socialists that were there fucking hated Obote. They wanted nothing to do with him, and a lot of them had been put in jail by Obote. He just wrote a pamphlet that was as meaningful as any zine any of us has ever read. It kind of goes without saying that a dictator who has stolen every bit of political power with no interest of ever giving it up cannot, in fact, start creating equality. This only created more political weakness for the unpopular Obote, while Amin openly boasted that dude was only in power because he let him be. The two men had been growing to fucking hate one another pretty much as soon as they were done blowing up the old king's palace. Amin, always close with the British, kept up his personal contacts despite the fact that Obote hated them, and the British were pretty convinced it was only a matter of time before one of them killed the other, but they weren't sure who was going to do it.
Obote is about to experience the I hate when my dogs turn into snakes.
The British even thought that Amin was seeking their approval for a future coup. And this is while Amin was just doing whatever he wanted within the army, like cutting deals with China to send trainers and equipment, something the British only picked up on when the High Commissioner was kinda sorta kidnapped into Amin's home for drinks one night and saw that over Amin's fireplace there was suddenly a large picture of Mao Zedong on the wall. A side note here, because this is very funny. Amin thought that the Chinese were sending military trainers, but instead, the Chinese officers that they sent were just sitting down Ugandan soldiers and telling them all about Maoism.
Yes. Yes.
All of this was happening as Amin became close personal friends with Colonel Baruch Bar-Lev of the Israeli Defense Force and head of the Israeli mission in Uganda. Bar-Lev was giving Amin virtually everything he wanted, from weapons to jets to training, in exchange for Uganda voting in favor of Israel at the UN, as well as a few other things. As an extra handshake agreement, Amin would be allowed to freely travel to Israel for medical treatment due to a horrible case of gout he was suffering thanks to his uncontrolled alcoholism. Amin was constantly sauced up. Even Bar-Lev, Amin's closest friend, thought that Amin was hamstringing all of the training efforts. Amin was sending men for officers training to Israel, but he sent people he personally liked, recruited through the same process that he had been recruited from. He favored rural men from the north, mostly from the tribes he was related to, many of whom still had little to no education whatsoever. So Bar-Lev was confused when he started getting illiterate truck drivers sent him for a 3-month crash course in professional military education. You could see how this would be a problem for like an infantry officer candidate. You can kind of sort of work around this for some things, but you could see how it would be a much bigger problem if said illiterate dude was selected to be a pilot, which happened quite often. If Amin liked a guy, and he only liked a guy if he was unquestionably following orders, they would find themselves being rapidly promoted over much more qualified people, creating a very top-heavy military of the unqualified. Middle and junior grade officers arguably became the only capable men within the ranks, but had all of their power and commandability taken away from them and siphoned upwards due to the simple fact that Amin was not their friend. By 1969, Uganda's political situation was pure unrelenting chaos. The country was largely torn between Obote and Amin, with Obote absolutely certain that Amin was plotting to kill him, which may or may not have been true. At a party meeting that same year, someone took a shot at Obote, with pretty much everyone assuming that the guy worked for Amin, but we still actually don't really know. Obote was only kind of winged by the bullet, and a quick and very bad investigation, of course, put the blame on a southerner, not connected to Amin, mostly because Amin was never going to be found connected to anything by the Ugandan police or military. In turn, the army and police began setting up checkpoints and brutalizing Southerners under the guise of looking for the gunman. A general from the army, at a meeting, publicly accused Amin of being bad at his job in response to the assassination, which was the first time this has ever happened to Amin. So within days, that general and his wife were killed in a drive-by shooting.
I was about to say, I think this is only going to go one way.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't be the first man to criticize Amin in public. It's not going to end well for you.
Yeah.
In turn, Obote began to attempt to break Amin's control over the army. He knew that on a long enough timeline, Amin was going to win this battle because Amin controlled the security services. So he created and then enlarged the General Services Unit, or the GSU. This is a kind of paramilitary/intelligence unit that answered only to the office of the Prime Minister, rather than Amin, with the explicit and public goal of countering threats from within the army and police. Obote made sure to staff this unit with men from his own tribe, and made sure it was commanded by people that would be loyal to him, like his cousin. No word if his cousin was equally the same size as him or not.
He has so many cousins in the back pocket, each of them larger than the other.
This also kind of implies the possibility of pansexual Idi Amin, so long as you're his cousin.
It's a Ugandan nesting doll, but with increasingly larger cousins.
Reverse nesting. Sorry, it's weird.
Soon, the best weapons being purchased by the state were being funneled into the GSU rather than the army. But Amin was also purchasing weapons, mostly illegally, and funneling them towards the army with his money that he had stolen from the government and also Congolese rebels. This is where things get kind of messy. With what is known as the Anyanya affair, Amin, independent from Obote, was still working with Israel, as Israel got heavily involved in Sudan's civil war, supporting the southern Sudanese against the north, hoping to create another outpost in their larger geopolitical anti-Arab, anti-Islamic policies. Israel wanted to use Uganda as a go-between to refuel their planes, which were shipping weapons, with Obote, at first, as head of state, refused and sought to sever ties with Israel altogether. Meanwhile, Amin simply ignored Obote and secretly continued working with them. This involved, Israeli planes were just landing at Entebbe, completely unknown from the actual government. The Ugandan military is fully supporting them. And this went on until August of 1970, when a German mercenary named Ralph Steiner was caught on the Ugandan-Sudanese border by the GSU. Now, this normally wouldn't be such a big problem. It's just another mercenary. It's Africa in the 1970s. There's a lot of these guys floating around there, especially with the civil war happening in Sudan. But Steiner happened to be carrying a detailed diary of all of his meetings with Amin and the Israelis in it. Steiner might be bad at his job.
Is when you take mindfulness journaling too far and you end up fucking up the spot, you know?
This is quite literally the Stringer Bell moment of are you taking notes in the middle of a criminal fucking conspiracy?
It's amazing how often people seem to be doing this. This isn't the first time we've invoked the reference to Stringer Bell in the meeting. People are just constantly I love writing down all this incriminating information and carrying it on my person at all times.
Yeah, people, they're talking shit about Steiner, but maybe he was neurodivergent. Maybe he had the ADHD and he had to try and create some sort of mindfulness practice to remember all the points that Idi Amin had made. So maybe he was journaling.
He really loved gossip. And he was a messy bitch who loved drama.
This is why the tender dictator would employ him. Yeah, you don't have to compromise me. I'll compromise me, bitch. In September, Obote sent Amin to Egypt as the Ugandan representative at Gamal Abdel Nasser's funeral. And while Amin was gone, Obote attempted to take over the army. He promoted everyone just one rank automatically and rapidly began appointing his own loyalists within key positions of this new version of the military. And now the Ugandan chief of staff would only answer to Obote rather than Amin, who he did not fire from being the overall commander of the army. Obote loyalists were dismissed from the army entirely or sent far away from Kampala to far-flung duty stations so they couldn't be used for any possible coup. When Amin returned, he quickly began moving behind the scenes, joining politically with Obote's main opposition, the Ugandan Muslim community, which is not just a broad term, it's the name of a political party, the UMC, made up of the same Southerners that Amin had just crushed a few years before. And this is also the first time that you see Amin really like grasping at his Islamic faith as a mean of political power, because he is a Muslim. He has been his entire life. Not a very well practicing one. He only really tries that to get Muammar Gaddafi to like him, but he knows the community and everything. But this is the first time he's really grasping onto it as a means for power.
He's not just a sensitive dictator, he's a performative Muslim as well. Bro is not praying 5 times a day. He is not on his deen.
I mean, he's also, like, again, a crippling alcoholic who has gout from all of the drinking. During this period, and for a lot of period afterwards, which we'll talk about in the next 3 episodes, there's secret flights of, like, the Ugandan Air Force flying into airports in London and Scotland and picking up whole pallets full of alcohol to bring back to Amin as, like, a gift from the British.
So the Brits were basically keeping him sauced up?
Yeah, they were. It was a way for them to like curry favor. They knew at this point Amin was still absolutely a Tiabu. He's working with the Israelis, sure, but he sees that as more of like a means to an end. He still loves the UK. He fucking loves them.
R.I.P. Idi Amin, you would have loved taking a selfie outside Big Ben with Chinese tourists.
He would have done it, but we'll get to his visit to the UK in a later episode.
R.I.P. Idi Amin, I would have loved to know what you thought of Bridgerton.
As Obote remained in power, he became politically opposed to the Brits and the Israelis, especially in regards to African nationalism and apartheid-era South Africa and Rhodesia. Obviously, the Brits opposed African nationalism, and both the Brits and the Israelis were supporters of the racist regimes in South Africa and Rhodesia. Side note, it's Zimbabwe now. Then Obote, thinking he was fully in command of the state's security forces, went for the killing blow against Amin. Rather than just shooting him, which is normally how these things end, he began to investigate him for the murder of that general and his wife, who died in the drive-by shooting. He also accused him of embezzling tens of millions of dollars from the Ministry of Defense. Now, this is an easy slam dunk for Obote, because he had been helping him do that. He's like, I know you did it. I kept the receipts.
Here's a photo of the two of us with all this gold. I'm not actually stealing it. I'm just there to like help you steal it.
Here's a photo of you in your military uniform made out of only ivory tusks. It was clear to Amin that he was pretty fucked, and he even complained about it to Bar-Lev over drinks, saying his loyalists were sent away and now Obote's men outnumbered his own in the capital. So Bar-Lev gave him some free advice. He advised him to bring in a corps of loyalists, a couple hundred, and equip them with heavy weapons, not rifles and pistols, but tanks and artillery. Bar-Lev then gave him a detailed rundown of the GSU and units loyal to Obote, which he had because he had helped set them up, saying, yeah, there's thousands of them, but they're lightly armed and you can take them out with heavier formations. So Amin launched his coup on January 25th, 1971. It goes very quickly. His soldiers quickly arrest many of the Obote loyalists within their ranks. Sometimes this coup is framed as happening with the explicit help of the British. This is contrary to any evidence that we actually have. They seemed as surprised about the coup as Obote was. According to cables sent from Kampala, from the High Commissioner's office to London, the first person to inform any British authority about what was happening was Colonel Bar-Lev. Bar-Lev informed them that Amin struck Obote because Obote was about to arrest Amin, which was technically probably correct. So it's more accurate to suggest that Israel helped Idi Amin plan his coup, but even then, it really just seems to be the passion project of this one guy. By 4 p.m. that day, it was announced over radio that Obote was gone and Amin was now in charge, behind what he called the 18 points, which was pretty much just a list of general grievances as to why Obote was a bad leader. And again, to be fair, the points made are valid, like arbitrary detention, a horrible economy, widespread corruption. And of course, Amin left out the fact that he was a pretty big reason that all of these were a problem in the first place. Amin framed all this as him reluctantly taking power, because you don't understand, I simply had no choice. And in some tellings of this, Amin actually says the soldiers launched the coup and then forced him to take command at gunpoint against his will. This is obviously untrue, but several different ways he tells the story. The coup was, at first, welcomed by the army, the Southerners, the Northerners, and virtually everybody other than the Lengi and Acholi tribes. Though to be clear for virtually everyone, this was a universal fuck that guy moment. Outside of the loyalists within the army, nobody liked Amin. And soon those people began to hear small arms fire, as Amin loyalist units disarmed and murdered Obote loyalists all throughout Kampala. This slaughter eventually went from Kampala to villages, hunting soldiers, cops, and leaders from the Lengi and Acholi tribes. The hit list was extensive, and between the two tribes, they made up about a third of the Ugandan security forces after Obote did his shock reforms when Amin was away. Southerners previously oppressed by the Obote government quickly joined in with the security forces, massacring civilians in an orgy of violence that would become commonplace during Idi Amin's reign. For the Lengi and Acholi soldiers within the military, their fate was very clear: fight and die, or run over the border to join Obote in exile and plot their next steps in either Kenya or Tanzania. Amin then announced the birth of the Second Republic of Uganda and released a ton of political prisoners to win people over. This included a lot of people he had put in prison, including Apolot, his former rival. In these early stages of Amin's rule, and I mean early stages, he brought in people from across Uganda for his new administration. Southerners, Northerners, South Asians, all while being supported by the UK, US, and Israel. The African leaders in Kenya, Tanzania, and Sudan, his immediate neighbors, fucking hated him for obvious reasons and rejected his coup attempt. And virtually none of this is made better by the fact that as soon as Amin took over, Ugandan and Tanzanian soldiers began shooting at one another over the border. This had to do with a piece of land that will become very, very important to our story in just a little bit, called the Kagera Salient. This is a piece of land that Amin and other Ugandans believed belonged to Uganda and had been given to Tanzania by the British during the whole border drawing process of independence. Ugandans generally believed that the real border of the two countries was the Kagera River, and Tanzania and the British had simply stolen nearly 2,000 square miles of what was rightfully theirs. That's their argument. There's a lot of historical back and forth on that one, but as the borders fell, there was a bit of a salient north of the Kagera River, 2,000 square miles, where they end up drawing the Ugandan border. Idi Amin and Obote to a lesser extent. And Obote is eventually going to drop all of that in the future for reasons we'll go into. To set it, their border, it's simply much easier to make it the river. No reasons why making it simple and easy also benefits Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
In comparison to his African neighbors, Amin was treated as an honored head of state by Israel and the UK. In the UK, he hung out with the Queen, he flew on her personal plane, he met the Prime Minister, he got to hang out in Sandhurst and play military officer, and of course, famously, Scotland, all while the press wrote glowingly about how he rightfully kicked out Obote. The British press at this point loved Idi Amin.
Yeah, I think this is something that we're going to get into in subsequent episodes of like Idi Amin's figure on the international stage was interesting and allowed him to get away with a lot of stuff.
It bounces back and forth wildly as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing he did while in the UK was meet with the Ministry of Defense and MI6. The reason for this was Amin was paranoid about a possible invasion from Tanzania. The country's leader, Nyerere, hated Amin and was a close ally of Obote, and not only an ally, like a friend. And Tanzania's military was currently undergoing its own reform training and armament program in a very practical way we'll talk about in a couple episodes. Amin demanded to know when this invasion was coming, to which the Brits were very, very confused. There was no invasion coming. Tanzania had no military capability to launch an invasion of Uganda to speak of, and all of this was pure paranoid fantasy. Amin did not believe them, and now began blaming the British for helping Tanzania. The other meetings didn't go any better, with Amin telling the UK he was going to move forward with one policy he's arguably best known for today: expelling Uganda's South Asia population, calling them simply UK passport holders, which some, but not all, were. Now, it didn't matter if they had a UK passport or not. At the end of the day, because Amin began seeing them all, every South Asian in Uganda, as British and not Ugandan. The UK kind of assumed this is coming anyway because Obote actually originally came up with this plan. It had been a couple years before then, and he never really pulled it off. So Amin may have actually done it, but Milton Obote is actually the one that came up with the program. And they're not even the only population that these two men would expel from Uganda. Now, the Brits tried to talk him out of it and failed. And Amin didn't really bring this up as a means of discussion or like negotiations. His mind was already made up. And he quickly pivoted from like this conversation about expelling tens of thousands of people into, I want Harrier jump jets, like at the drop of a hat. Now, this is a pretty big problem for the Brits because Uganda's economy has been run into the ground. The UK had already given them a ton of weapons on loan and they never paid them off. The debt was just racking up and up and up and up. And while Idi Amin is sitting there trying to get Harrier jump jets, a wildly expensive, highly technical weapons platform that Uganda just did not have the ability to pay for, use, or maintain, while he's sitting there doing that, it's found out that like Amin's counterpart, his Minister of Defense, is in France trying to get a different highly technical jet from France. So like that pissed off both France and the UK, who give them nothing. So then he turns to Israel, who pretty much does the same thing because they've been giving them this shit on debt and he's not servicing it at all. He's not paying back any loans to anybody. So Amin returns to Uganda empty-handed, pissed off, and pretty goddamn sure there's a Tanzanian invasion coming any moment now. And that is where we'll pick up next time on part 2.
You know, I know a little bit about this part of the story because my good friend and friend of the show, Hussein Kisvani, his family were Ugandanasians who were expelled in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And his parents were teenagers at the time. And yeah, like most of these people did not have British passports. They were British subjects because that's how the Commonwealth worked. And they also, when they got to the United Kingdom, their experience was quite poor in terms of how they were received. And so this is a thing you hear in other post-colonial countries as well. But in this specific case, it feels like it was just, if I remember correctly, Idi Amin was like, oh, it came to me in a dream that I have to purify Uganda.
Well, it was originally Milton Obote's idea when Milton Obote was head of state, and he just never did it. Amin got right in there and got to work, unfortunately. And for Americans, actually, recently had to learn that there were, in fact, South Asians from Uganda because that's where Zoran Mamdani's family's from. And his father plays a part in this story. We will get to him on part 4. But fellas, that is the Kagera War part 1. We got a whole lot more to go. But until then, you host other podcasts. Plug those other podcasts.
Trash Future, What a Hell of a Way to Dad, Kill James Bond, are No Gods, No Mayors, all shows I'm involved with to some extent. Please check them out.
Beneath the Skin and Bloodwork, and you can follow me on Instagram at scamgolden, Goldin. I feel like the Michael Jordan flu game right now, so I'm going to stop talking.
This is still the only show that I host. Thanks for listening to it. Consider supporting us on Patreon. $5 a month gets you absolutely everything from every episode early to our entire backlog of nearly 8 years of bonus content, side series, Discord access, side series like Lines Led by Robots, History of Armenia, everything. There's also other levels if you want to give less or more, but consider supporting the show or leaving a review on wherever it is you listen to podcasts. It helps us immensely, especially when it comes to finding venues to do live shows. So if you want us, come to your town. Maybe leave us a review because you're a local comedy show guy. We'll get really mad if there's not enough reviews and say that we're not worth his time. So thanks for that. And until next time, get a whole plane load of booze from the UK and do a coup.
It always works.